A bold escape.
Several inmates on Pod 1 Delta were missing.
10 inmates shimmy open a cell door, carve their way through a wall.
There are clean cuts here, and the plumbing had been removed.
And make a run for it with no one watching.
And the technician that was assigned to the housing unit module had actually stepped away to grab food.
A now viral photo shows the messages they left behind taunting the jail staff. It would take hours before the Orleans Sheriff's Office alerted anyone on the outside.
One of the other chiefs picked up the phone and said, well, it's in the media.
A firestorm of criticism erupts with calls for the sheriff to resign. Victims, witnesses, even prosecutors forced into hiding.
Just get all our family members out of the city.
I am personally afraid. Not just for myself, but for my lawyers.
This is the New Orleans Jailbreak, the first 7 days. Well, thank you for watching our special coverage of the Orleans Parish Jail escape. I'm Sharice Gibson. We're going to bring you a detailed timeline to show exactly how the saga started, who's been captured and where. You'll also see the problems now being blamed for allowing a total of 10 inmates to reach freedom. For 5 of the prisoners, it would only be temporary. Half of the escapees were back in custody 1 week after the escape. Devin Bartolotta breaks it down, walking us through all the major events since the inmates made it out of the Orleans Justice Center.
It was a week that exposed cracks in the overall security system at the Orleans Justice Center. Cracks in the communication between law enforcement. Cracks that 10 inmates slipped right through unnoticed, giving them an 8-hour head start on law enforcement when minutes mattered.
Here's how it started. Day 1. At 12:23 in the morning, Friday, May 16th, inmates began pulling on a cell door, a door that the sheriff's office knew could be manipulated off the track. No staff members were in the pod, and a civilian hired to watch the cameras had stepped away. At 12:43, the inmates entered a cell where the water had apparently been turned off, and someone, either inside that cell or maybe out, sawed through rebar, bolts, and a pipe to make a hole. This is the moment of freedom. At 1:01 a.m., 10 inmates ran out of a loading dock door and reportedly used blankets to climb over razor wire. All 10 of them then ran across the interstate in front of several cars. The hours that followed would be crucial, but the escape went apparently unnoticed through a 6:30 a.m. shift change and wasn't discovered until 8:47 a.m. during morning head count. At some point, staff discovered the hole in the cell wall and the taunting message left behind. Too easy, LOL. At 8:53, the jail was put on lockdown. 9:30, the Marshals Task Force was notified. 10:30, the New Orleans Police Department was notified. 10:50, the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office sent out a press release about the escape. At 11:30 a.m., Troop NOLA arrested escapee Kendall Miles in the French Quarter. Around the same time, Sheriff Susan Hudson held her first news conference and released the names of the missing inmates.
Our top priority right now is the safety of the public and returning these individuals to our custody without delay.
Immediately, the finger-pointing began. Hudson cited a lack of funding for security problems at the jail.
I think it's safe to say I'm angry. This is absurd.
District Attorney Jason Williams blamed Hudson's poor leadership. And just about everyone was furious about how long it took to notice the jailbreak and sound the alarm. Not until 1:30 in the afternoon did WWL Louisiana and the public get a look at mugshots of the missing inmates who had enjoyed a full 12.5 hours under the veil of anonymity. At 2:30, a NOLA Ready alert finally went out, and the sheriff implied in an afternoon update this might be an inside job.
We think this was intentional. There is much more than meets the eye.
Hours later, 3 jail employees had been suspended. At 7:30, a Crime Stoppers tip led authorities to a second inmate, Robert Moody, in Central City. And later that night, a third, Dakeenan Dennis, was caught in New Orleans East. Saturday, the day after the escape, Louisiana State Police shared photos of their officers loading Miles, Moody, and Dennis into a helicopter on their way to a state prison. But 7 inmates were still on the run. A terrifying reality for witnesses, victims, and families of victims.
We had to get everyone out of the city.
The family of Jamar Robinson, who was killed by convicted escapee Derek Groves, told WWL Louisiana Saturday that they went into hiding.
I want you to know that you are safe. If you do see something, you say something.
We also heard for the first time from Mayor LaToya Cantrell in a video posted to Instagram. She thanked law enforcement, who continued to stage major scenes across the metro, including this street in New Orleans East, which did not lead to the arrest of a missing inmate. But as the pressure to find them increased, so did the reward. Saturday night, it stood at $12,000 per inmate. Day 3, Sunday, netted no inmates, but cranked up the political tension and saw the reward increase to $20,000. Project NOLA released a video from Friday morning of Kendall Miles and possibly another inmate walking in the French Quarter minutes before Miles was caught by state police.
These inmates are accused of serious crimes.
The FBI emphasized Sunday night the consequences of harboring a fugitive.
Turn yourself in.
And Governor Jeff Landry pointed fingers at District Attorney Jason Williams and criminal court judges. He announced plans for the Department of Corrections to audit the jail, plus investigations by the Attorney General and the Inspector General. Day 4, Monday. With no inmates recaptured over the weekend, we learned more about those still on the run. 5 of 7 of them had either been charged with or convicted of murder or attempted murder. 2 of the inmates had escaped custody previously. And Monday, the simmering frustrations over this escape came to a boil.
I just don't see why you should be sheriff if you can't do your one job.
State Representative Amy Adato Freeman called for Sheriff Susan Hudson to resign. District Attorney Jason Williams fired back at the governor while adding some of his staff members had gone into hiding as well. Sheriff Hudson and Attorney General Liz Murrill were called to an emergency meeting with the federal judge overseeing the jail's consent decree. In Baton Rouge, a new bill was filed to require adult jail facilities to report escapees within 10 minutes. Then, Monday evening, another inmate was arrested. 21-year-old Gary Price was taken into custody in New Orleans East and then put on a helicopter to a maximum security facility. 4 days in, 6 inmates still missing. On day 5, with 4 recaptured inmates at Louisiana State Penitentiary, there were signs that the internal investigation into their alleged escape was making headway. News came that 33-year-old Sterling Williams was charged with helping out. He was a maintenance worker. Sources say he admitted to turning off water to the cell where a toilet was removed. Williams's attorney said he was just doing his job.
He was used as a tool by the escapees and is being used as a fall guy by Sheriff Hudson.
City Council wanted answers too.
One arrest has been made, and we are continuing to pursue everyone involved.
Sheriff Hudson took responsibility at a meeting with the Criminal Justice Committee. That meeting got heated at times, and Hudson asked for more money for the jail. Later, she announced she was temporarily suspending her re-election campaign to focus on the problem at hand. Local, state, and federal law enforcement were focused too, making a scene, first in Slidell with SWAT, then hours later in the Iberville neighborhood, where state police arrested 19-year-old Corey Boyd in his grandmother's apartment. Day 6, Wednesday, we learn more about that scene in Slidell. It had ties to one of 2 women charged with helping inmates after the escape. Investigators say Corvante Baptiste and Courtney Harris got food, communicated by phone, and helped drive inmates around. And new video obtained by WWL Louisiana showed the men walking in the CBD near Barone Street about an hour after the jailbreak.
I saw the locks issues, I saw the hinges issue, I saw what they were talking about with the sliding doors.
Attorney General Liz Murrill and DA Williams got their first look at the jail and the security problems in it. And at the state level, Governor Jeff Landry signed an executive order.
Today, we say enough is enough.
Directing multiple agencies to put OJC and New Orleans justice system under a microscope. Only 5 inmates were in custody by Wednesday, with none of them having traveled even 10 miles from the Orleans Justice Center. Day 7, another day without an inmate arrest, but 59-year-old Connie Whedon of Slidell was taken into custody, accused of helping one escapee and giving him money. Also Thursday, WWL Louisiana obtained more video of those inmates strolling through the CBD the morning of the jailbreak. And we learned that the district attorney's office had to step in and call the crime lab to collect DNA, fingerprints, and other evidence.
I am deeply concerned that there was not an immediate request by the sheriff.
The list of probes, investigations, and players is continuing to grow, with recapture, responsibility, and rectification on center stage. Devin Bartolotta, WWL Louisiana.
And as you can imagine, when word of the inmates' escape from the Orleans Justice Center reached their alleged victims, there were questions over not only how this could happen, but why they weren't notified. Some families say they didn't even receive a call alerting them of the jailbreak. Others say the thought of these escapees being back on the streets sent them into hiding.
No one notified us. No one tell us anything.
Derek Groves is one of the inmates who broke out of OJC, along with 9 others. He initially made headlines after being found guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder and 2 charges of attempted second-degree murder in a Mardi Gras Day shooting in 2018, claiming the lives of Byron Jackson and Jamar Robinson. Now, Robinson's family, who asked to remain anonymous for fear of their safety, are in hiding as Derek Groves remains on the loose. Groves was set for sentencing in July of this year after being convicted last year in their family member's murder.
You know, we had to leave work. We didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know how Derek Groves felt like with this process of us. You know, either he was coming for us, we didn't know.
It's a fear shared by some of the alleged victims of the escapees, and in anger, they weren't notified by authorities that their lives could be in danger. Another shooting victim says his alleged perpetrator's escape stoked fears he would try to finish the job.
My mother called me up and told me that Kendall Miles escaped from prison.
Kendall Miles, the first escapee to be captured, is accused of shooting this victim in 2022. That was as he was on the run during another escape, this time from the Bridge City Center for Youth.
That's the only thing that's going through my head is that looking for me again to try to shoot me again and make it right by killing me.
But District Attorney Jason Williams says the fear of retaliation is widespread, even pushing 2 of his prosecutors to leave the city.
I am personally afraid. Not just for myself, but for my lawyers. We were asking for a life sentence of this man, and he is now at large. 2 of the lawyers who I tried that case with, who successfully went forward, able to get a conviction on that case, these lawyers got out of town this weekend with their families out of fear of retribution and retaliation.
Acts of retaliation are why some are calling foul at OJC. It wasn't known for hours some inmates were running loose on the streets. DA Williams has been critical not only of Sheriff Susan Hudson's handling of the jailbreak, but why all victims and their family members weren't immediately notified.
Any family member who is scared or frustrated, they have every right to be, because this should not have happened. And if it happened at 1 a.m., they should have been notified at 1:30.
The Louisiana legislature is in session, and in the immediate aftermath of the jailbreak, a bill was amended requiring jails to report escapes within 10 minutes. The bill was amended by House Criminal Justice Committee Chair Debbie Villio, who says in part it is inexcusable that the prison break of the magnitude of the one that occurred in New Orleans could go unreported for hours. It is irresponsible for an agency not to sound the alarm about possible harm to a community. A similar bill made it past Governor Jeff Landry's desk last year, requiring public notification of juvenile escapees.
Several inmates on Pod 1 Delta were missing during their head count.
Until the remaining escapees are caught, the families we spoke to say they will remain in the shadows, hoping these alleged criminals are brought to justice once again. We were inside the jail just weeks before the escape with Sheriff Susan Hudson showing us some of the issues like broken locks, and WWL investigative reporter Mike Pearlstein toured that jail with Hudson shortly after she was elected in 2022. Joining us now for a discussion on how this all played out. There were issues that Hudson pointed out 2-3 years ago with the jail.
In particular, those jail cell doors, which can be moved off their tracks so that they don't lock properly. And she showed us how inmates took advantage of that by stuffing towels or, wadded up tissue paper to keep those off the track and use that, at different times when they're supposed to be locked down to get out of their cells.
I know a lot of people said that they were having issues. Susan Hudson spoke up about this before. We did not receive the funding to fix those things. So why is that?
Well, that's actually being investigated by the City Council, among others, as to what kind of funding the sheriff did get and what it went toward. However, she did point out that there were, physical plant deficiencies in that jail. At the time in 2022, when I took that tour, she blamed a lot of it on her predecessor not maintaining, the facility, which was relatively new, 2015, when that new jail opened. And there are obviously questions from 2022 up to present, where the money went, why some of these deficiencies, as she described them, weren't addressed earlier. prior to the millage election, we went on a tour and she pointed out some of the same problems and issues still existed. So I do think now that there's a lot of attention on Sheriff Hudson's administration of the jail and actually the building itself. Where did the money go? You know, she went so far as to tell us during the course of our coverage that they don't have any kind of a maintenance contract.
Well, isn't Governor Landry doing proposed an audit on the Orleans Parish Sheriff's Office?
Yes, he's proposed an audit. The City Council is probing the money. It looks like, you know, there's going to be a lot of eyes at many levels on the sheriff's operation of that jail.
You talk about her predecessor. You spoke with Marlon Gusman, and you of course mentioned about the fact that this was relatively a new jail. What was his response to everything that's happened and everything that Sheriff Susan Hudson has said?
Right, we got on a Zoom call, an interview with the former sheriff, Marlon Gusman, and he said that the failures were catastrophic, that none of the issues were too big that they could not have been addressed. He said that it was not just the building, but the guards, the other personnel, and we do need to point out that that existed during Marlon Gusman's time. It carried over into Susan Hudson's tenure as the sheriff, and she readily admitted that particular pod at the time unmanned, that another lookout area for monitoring of cameras, the person assigned there went out to get something to eat.
And that person was a civilian.
Correct, civilian monitor. They don't necessarily have to be trained, post-certified law enforcement deputies. They're the ones who interact, say, on the floor with the inmates. The ones who sit in control modules are usually civilians.
Well, talk about this. There's the fact that the sheriff is investigating, and there was one arrest so far of this being an inside job. One maintenance worker was arrested, claiming that he was being held up by threatened rather by one of the escapees, and two other workers were suspended. So far, we don't know who they are or what their role was in all of this.
I do know that one of the suspensions was a supervisory level, high rank, and that was probably just for the failures that went on, on more ground level, the night and up into the morning of the escape itself. We're still waiting for information on the other suspensions and where that's going to lead. I would say it's pretty safe that we aren't seeing the last of either suspensions or even criminal charges on people inside the jail who worked there.
Well, for those inside of the jail that do work there, investigator Katie Moore pointed out that maybe less than 40 people were running the entire jail and making sure they were in control of more than 1,400 inmates that are inside of that jail, and they said a large percentage of those working inside of the jail were female. How do all of those factors play a role in this?
Oh, they play a role, and they have played a role, and we have heard it from Sheriff Hudson and her predecessors before her that they have difficulty keeping those positions filled. The pay is relatively low, especially for the work environment, which is very difficult. And that demographic breakdown on gender is true. About 70+% of the employees in the jail itself are female. There's a very high rate of turnover. There's, according to Sheriff Hudson, currently about 40% vacancies. This is even after she was able to get the pay increased beyond the, barely above minimum wage to something closer to $18 an hour. But even at that pay rate, very difficult to keep people in those jobs working in very difficult conditions.
And so, Clancy Dubose said something, our political analyst, that when incidents like these happen, we tend to see some major changes, the call for change. And we know that Attorney General Liz Murrill, along with the District Attorney Jason Williams, walked through the Justice Center and got a firsthand look at some of the deficiencies that this place has. So, Mike, I think that, as you mentioned, and as Sheriff Susan Hudson mentioned, we may see more arrests and more people who are going to be on suspension as they probe more into this escape. Now, And we were initially told some of the inmates may have left the state, but all 5 of those caught since Friday were still in New Orleans. And as Rachel Hanley shows us, some were just down the street from the prison.
Even in the hours before the public knew they were gone, and the days since the jailbreak, none of the 5 inmates caught at this point made it too far. This map shows where each of them were arrested and how far those spots are from the prison. 1 was less than a mile away. 2 more were about a mile and a half. Then 2 more were in New Orleans East, about 6 miles and 9 miles away. To get a better idea of how far those distances would be on foot or in a car, we retraced the escapees' steps. Of the 5, Robert Moody was found closest to the prison. Starting there, slowing down for midday traffic and road work, it only took 7 minutes to get to 2nd Street and South Galvez. The inmate that was found the quickest was Kendall Miles. We know from crime camera footage that he was walking around the French Quarter as late as 10 a.m. the day of the escape. Getting there from the prison took him through the busiest part of the city. Later that morning, he was found under a car on Royal Street. Finally, Gary Price made it the furthest of the 5. From the prison, it took about 20 minutes to drive to his hiding spot. He was arrested at a vacant house on Good Drive in New Orleans East. Still, even Price was less than 10 miles from the prison. Unfortunately, none of this tells us where the other 5 inmates are. But the fact that all of the ones caught so far were still in the city is a good reminder to stay vigilant. Rachel Handley, WWL Louisiana.
Officials found the first inmate less than 12 hours after that escape. Facial recognition cameras helped Troop NOLA track down Kendall Miles Friday, May 16th in the French Quarter. The technology is a big help, but could it have helped even more? That's a question investigative reporter Mike Pearlstein looked into after claims the footage could have led to a second arrest had it not been for changes at NOPD.
This footage of escaped inmate Kendall Miles came from one of the 200 cameras operated by Project NOLA that is capable of facial recognition, a sophisticated computer program that uses artificial intelligence to identify wanted suspects. A second inmate is seen with him, but Brian Lagarde, director of the nonprofit Project NOLA, said he was not able to immediately notify the nearest NOPD officers.
The NOPD was actually still active with our alerts. There would have been 2 people very likely apprehended that day.
Lagarde said that weeks after behind-the-scenes debate, the police department decided about a month ago to pause its use of Project NOLA's facial recognition technology.
We're still doing it for FBI, DEA, ATF, U.S. Marshals, Louisiana State Police, and other authorities in the area. But no, we're no longer doing it for the NOPD at the request of the NOPD.
Why then did the NOPD unplug?
That's a good question, and I'm hoping you find out the answer to it.
Lagarde isn't the only person who wants answers. City Council member Oliver Thomas chairs the Criminal Justice Committee.
Had no idea that NOPD pulled the plug. That's unfortunate in many cases, especially because it was a tool that was given that the police department said they wanted.
Thomas said the technology would have been especially useful to the NOPD when cameras first spotted Kendall Miles with the other escaped inmate in the French Quarter.
You could have gotten 2 for the picture of 1. That was a missed opportunity. At some point, someone's going to have to explain to me, and I'm sure many others, why was this program paused?
Lagarde said he got around the NOPD ban that day by notifying the state police, but he said the troopers were not nearly as close to that location as NOPD officers. You can't get a hold of NOPD and alert like your officer standing right next to a wanted suspect.
Our radios were taken away.
Mike Pearlstein, WWL, Louisiana.
And an emailed response, NOPD said, quote, Superintendent Ann Kirkpatrick directed the suspension of automated alerts from Project NOLA's facial recognition system once made aware of their use. This decision was made to ensure full compliance with NOPD policy, city ordinance, and constitutional standards. The statement goes on to say the NOPD can still use Project NOLA cameras in other ways, but for now, officers can no longer use real-time facial recognition alerts. We'll be tracking all the fallout from the probe by the state legislative auditor to the suspension of Sheriff Susan Hudson's re-election campaign. Here's another look at the 10 inmates that escaped, including the 5 that have been recaptured in the first 7 days. You can find information on submitting anonymous tips on our website, and the reward has now grown to a total of $20,000 per inmate. Thanks for watching this special edition of the WWL Louisiana News on the first 7 days of the Orleans Parish jail escape. We're bringing it to you exclusively on WWL+. That's where you can watch all of our newscasts live or anytime on demand, as well as special programs just like this one. Just download the WWL+ app on your television to watch for free.